Are we okay to start? Yes, wonderful. I was hoping someone would kick us off, so I'll do the honor myself as chair of the panel. Can you guys hear us okay? Wonderful. Welcome to our panel, which is about the next generation of services. I am the chair of this panel today. My name is Kuangyi. I'm a strategy director at Accenture, a very traditional management consulting firm. But I was a former social science student, so it's a great honor for me to be here in the British Academy. So I will be joined by my three esteemed panelists. I'll ask them to introduce themselves when I ask the first question, but just to set the scene a little bit about today. Today we're talking about the next generation services economy. As we all know, Britain has a great services economy. We have great academia, great social sciences, humanity, and arts. So the question is about how do we marry this together to drive commercializable advisory services to enrich the services landscape and then keep the UK's competitive edge globally. So we'll start by kind of looking back a little bit around how our panelists have enabled, originated, and delivered research-based advisory services. And then we'll talk a little bit about the current sort of challenges and then look forward to about future growth prospect. We're hoping to keep maybe 15 minutes or so towards the end for Q&A. So do think about questions for the panelists during that time and raise your hand. I think there might be a roving mic later on, or you can shout rather loudly. So let's start by asking the very first question about what brought us here so far, your journey so far. Obviously, you're here as great examples of having delivered research-based advisory services, enabled and founded them. Can you share a little bit about your role, where you come from, and how you have enabled that journey so far?
Great. Thank you so much for kicking us off, and good morning to everyone. I'm Dr. Elitsa Garnizova. I'm based within and lead the Trade Policy Hub, which is a venture within LSE Consulting, in turn within the London School of Economics and Political Science. And I think we sort of we have multiple hats here. So we're one of the ventures, an example of a venture and how it develops and how it supports the UK services economy, but also we support others in doing that, and we work in a lot of partnerships. So there are multiple sort of ways in which we can sort of approach the questions today. But to start with, I think that very much our journey has been an example of showcasing how evidence-based, rigorous research coming out of academia can feed into the services economy, into policy making, into working with different government departments within the UK, but also outside of the UK. Showcasing how independent research can contribute in partnership with more traditional consulting firms, other universities, and other research organizations to deliver very specific trade policy research, in our case, to the UK. So I think that in the core of our contribution really comes our specialism. So that's from where we grew, our specialism in trade policy, which now has spread into trade and investment policy issues, trade and sustainability, trade and industrial policy, which are all areas that very much contribute to core areas of growth for the UK economy. And just in terms of one additional point on this, I think that one of the aspects that also makes us as a venture core to this landscape is tackling complexity. So a lot of the SHAPE ventures are very fit for purpose to tackle very complex questions because they do so within that academic environment, and transporting that to, again, the policy context or working with private companies makes us a very good fit to enrich that landscape.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name's John Beaverstock. I'm from the University of Bristol. I'm an academic, and I work in the University of Bristol Business School. But actually, don't tell anyone this, I'm an economic geographer by training. And I've experienced working in different disciplinary backgrounds within 3 universities and currently at Bristol. For the last probably 10 years, I've been focusing my research and engagement in the financial services industry. I was lucky enough to win some aspect funding from Research England probably 5 years ago, where we were looking at fintech and trying to develop relationships between fintech and the universities to try to commercialize, but also to try to just, develop that story of knowledge exchange. And there were various deep dives in various different sectors, and I was working with colleagues from Glasgow and Bristol on the fintech. And from that, I went through a couple of ESRC IAA account awards. Many thanks to the ESRC for those. And what they did was actually embed me within the ecosystem of financial services. So an academic studying financial services, they were subjects. I quickly became an academic where it was about collaboration, cooperation, and working together to begin to identify problems and then begin to think about solutions. And finally, sorry, it's taken me a while to get to the point, I'm the Principal Investigator for the Innovate UK ESRC Social Science, I'll say that again, Social Science Innovation Adoption Accelerator for SMEs and financial services. And for the past 2.5 years, what we've been doing with colleagues from Glasgow University, Glasgow Caledonian, University of West of England, Set Squared Partnership, FinTech West, FinTech Wales and FinTech Scotland, we've created the architecture of an accelerator for SMEs and financial services that actually are behind the curve for innovation adoption. And the key issue here has been the behavioural way that adoption hasn't been accelerated. So the social science perspective that we put in place through coaching, mentoring, through offering specific solutions to organisations that want to overcome particular problems, it's very much based around a social science perspective. So, on our team, we've got academic lawyers looking at financial regulation and risk, and that feeds into the accelerator. We have innovation studies scholars, entrepreneur scholars. We also have an economic geographer, looking at issues around competition and financial innovation. And we've been successful in now over 100 SMEs have gone through the accelerator. They've adopted solutions, or they're in the process of adopting solutions. And it's all been about that behavioural change, that change in leadership perspectives, in grappling with risk, overcoming the fear of change, the fear of risk. So even though the accelerator has been about innovation adoption, it's been the perspective of leading change within organisations, not about the tech itself, which, I explain endlessly. It's not about the tech itself, it's about that behavioural journey that organisations have to go through. And we've been working with independent financial advisors, with building societies, with credit unions, with community banks, with insurance brokers, not with the shiny fintechs. They're really helpful and they're a part of our accelerator to provide solutions or to talk to these organisations. So, we're coming to the end of our funding. Thank you very much, Innovate UK ESRC. And now we've just started in the third cohort of the ARC Accelerator. So we're now moving the project, into a phase of thinking about what do we commercialise, how do we do it, and how do we move into this very crowded market. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Mel Knetsch, and until 3 weeks ago, I worked in UKRI, and I'm now director of the GW4 Alliance Consortia, which includes Bath, Bristol, Cardiff, and Exeter, so across into Wales. So many of you have asked how it's going, and I said it's fantastic, but 3 weeks in, and my brain's a bit like a pinball machine, so lots of ideas are lighting up around, going everywhere. But the question was really my role in potentially enriching the services landscape. And I think one of the really exciting bit, if people remember, Christopher also mentioned it on the talk, is about the industrial strategy. I remember developing a grey streak around that as we were working with Innovate UK. But I actually think that that's one of the most exciting things that it came out of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, was Innovate UK working with arts, humanities, and social sciences together. And it's a global first. When you look for other funders doing this, the business funder working with the SHAPE disciplines, we've not been able to find any so far. So that is really exciting, I think, in the UK. And as part of that work, specifically, I was working with Stephen Browning on the professional services in the first instance, which was accounting, legal, and insurance. And then in round two, when we took it out of that and we sort of normalized it into our funding, we included the financial services as part of that. The other, so lots of funding, lots of work, and lots of embedding of knowledge and insights from the social science and humanities, but also working with EPSRC and Innovate, so really trying to bring solutions focus, not discipline focus, to these sectors. The other side of that, at the same time of helping to get the community readiness levels, we could say, was helping to embed business engagement professionals in impact acceleration accounts and in universities for the arts, humanities, and social science to help them get ready to source the businesses, to kind of start developing those relations. It's always quite interesting to me is that businesses, industry will land in a university and often get pointed down the STEM disciplines because people think it's just technology. But businesses are about people, they've got finance, they've got HR, they need to think about tax, they need to think about the global market. So actually the university in itself offers a breadth of services and knowledge and insights and partnership potential. And I think that's what we've been really able to show. So yeah, I'll stop there for you.
I love it. If only we have it within my company, we have all the specialization in one ecosystem. I would love that to happen. So let's talk about commercialization a little bit, if I may start with you, Elitsa. So, you obviously, Trade Policy Hub, it celebrates specialization, specialism to inform evidence-based policymaking. But that's something traditional consulting company also do. Can you share a bit more about how you started the journey about commercializing your research specialty? Did you have that spark of idea from the beginning, or did you kind of retrofit your business model, as it were?
That's a really great question, because my journey, I think, is very specific to the context of me having held almost every single sort of title or role within the London School of Economics. So I've been a research assistant, I've been a researcher, I've been a project manager, I've been now a lead of a venture, so holding those different hats. But right from the start, I started my PhD almost simultaneously with working for LSE Consulting. So that meant that I was in parallel doing my PhD research, so getting into all of those curiosities and questions that I wanted to respond to from a research perspective, trying to understand all of the puzzles in the trade policy world, even before it was popular and before the American presidents made it popular. So I was trying to delve into this from an academic perspective, but at the same time, it was always with that policy lens from consulting. And so how can we use some of those learnings of what I'm doing and that research to inform policy making? So they were very much in parallel. So luckily, there was no need to retrofit most of it, so they really ran hand in hand. And we're constantly thinking about, okay, so we're now trying to develop these methodologies on trade and investment measurement, for example, try to link better trade with sustainability concerns. How does this look in practice outside of academia? How would it look on the desk in a report somewhere in the European Commission? And so I would say that I was very... The one problem with this approach is that you're kind of very torn, because as an academic, or sort of from an ethical perspective, I think, because you're sort of very torn into kind of constantly having a critical approach, like critically approaching everything that the policy world does. But at the same time, you want to do something that helps them, and you might be doing a project alongside them as well. So you're co-designing and collaborating, but at the same time criticizing them. So that was sort of the journey of kind of self-learning throughout the whole process of developing different types of products and services that would serve policymakers, but at the same time also raise their awareness of some of the issues that they need to address. And just to just a small point on this, so very much, I think that was really the heart of our success. The fact that I knew from day one that I want to do a very robust research with my PhD research, but I wanted it to be policy oriented, and I found people around me that thought the same way about research.
Can I just say, commenting from a sort of traditional management consulting perspective, you just touched on two great principles. One is around being commercial or having the goal by design, which is always something we aim to do. And then the other thing is around how do you maintain the independent advisory when your client is paying you. These two are my, every consultant's holy grail. Yeah. So well done on that. So I think I need to learn a bit more from you around the stakeholder management side. But on the commercialization point, so, John, obviously you have the vantage point of the ecosystem, or I may say, sort of entire life cycle of innovation. So can you share a bit more about what worked well? What are some of the best practices you have seen from your experience?
Yes, I think, so, being an academic, I had to strategically make a really explicit shift to working with my financial services, I can call them colleagues now, not subjects of study. And I think that's a really important shift towards actually being embedded in an ecosystem as an equal partner in the ecosystem, but you have the credibility of an academic which is neutral, as it were. So I think that's a really important sort of learning. I think second, it actually was through the Research England Aspect Award and through the ESRC IAA, that was a mechanism to really build those connections that actually wasn't about the extraction of data, as it were, but about the transfer of knowledge and about transferring best practice and actually offering solutions to organizations, mainly from my perspective around ecosystem building or around innovation solutions, which organizations, SMEs, other firms wouldn't necessarily A, have the ability to pay for, or B, actually think, who can I get this information from? So I think that was a really important grounding point. And the Future Finance Accelerator that we've created with our team has been exceptionally successful in offering bespoke solutions to SMEs, credit unions and other financial service firms that aren't necessarily at the forefront of the IA industrial strategy, but actually they're the underbed of the financial services industry in the UK. So actually having a voice for them is actually a really important sort of calling card when you embed yourself in those ecosystems. And it's a strange sort of extensionalist moment where we're running an accelerator through Innovate UK ESRC to then join the ARC Accelerator and become a member of an accelerator. That's a bit weird, but actually it's really exciting because we can transfer all the knowledge that we've been organising through our accelerator for these organisations. We can learn from those networks and relationships what works and maybe what doesn't work, but also at the same time, we can think about where we can add value in that value chain. And we've had the real privilege to have advisory boards in Bristol and in Glasgow joined together, which has helped us navigate some of the big meta picture issues around innovation adoption and around commercialization. Clearly going through the ARC Accelerator in this third round, we know, if we want to commercialize future finance, we're going to be moving into a very crowded space, from Kaplan through to, boutique consultants who offer training, advice and innovation adoption through to large professional services organizations. I won't look to my right. And we've got to just think about the value of the academic perspective, but also the efficiencies and how we can think about where we can add value as an academic entity, but equally where we can add value in a marketplace which is really crowded. So from our perspective, is thinking about that sort of, the classic sort of market validation of, where is your North Star and how can you make sure that you can add value, and the bottom line is somebody will actually engage you for your services. And we are a service provider and a service in the service industry. But coming back to the commercialization aspect, it's been a real privilege to work with the subjects, the SMEs, the founders, the independent financial advisors, building societies, community banks, credit unions, to understand their challenges and barriers of innovation adoption, because that gives us the seeds to begin to think about where we can sort of align some solutions. So that's where we are at this sort of moment in our journey.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and obviously that's, you guys are here because you are great success stories, but the challenge is still, like, we don't see this as often or as, frequently as we do. So Mel, question is, are we finding, to John's point, we all start with finding the North Star, the white space, as it were. Are we finding the right kind of social sciences innovations? How would you think that kind of picture needs to change?
Oh, that's a good question. Do I think the first thing I'd like to do is just pause, though, and think about where we were 10 years ago in this discussion, i.e. we weren't having any of this discussion, and now we are. And we've got networks, we've got people who are professional services, we've got support, we've got knowledge. We're really thinking, actually, even at this conference or this the reSHAPE event, we're much more mature, I think, in our thinking and understanding in this area. So I think we're on a journey. We haven't achieved our journey, but I think we have a much clearer understanding of at least where we're going, rather than just trying a few things and innovating ourselves. So I think that's a really critical point. I think the challenge isn't, are we funding the wrong research to commercialize? The question is how are we thinking about sustainability of research from the beginning, right? So not all research is a potential product to create something. But usually research creates knowledge and insights. And actually the arts, humanities, and social science, that's one of the critical aspects that's really desired, is understanding the knowledge there. So I think part of it is a mindset. When I was first in working in this, the word commercialization, you couldn't say that. A few of us remember that. Wait, let's try a different word. And I kept saying, but that's wrong. We shouldn't create a new word just because we're SHAPE. What we need to do is redefine the word and own the word and understand what it means for us as a community. But we were using gentle words such as sustainable impact through a business model that might potentially need income, i.e. commercialization. So we're at least, we've come that way. But how do we get that thinking in a positive way? So the mindset, I think, is shifting to be thinking about that from the beginning. The opportunities and case studies and inspirational understanding and what not to do, I think is really helpful. But I also learned, which was actually quite humbling in my naivety, of thinking that STEM disciplines had it easy. They had all the support that they needed in a university. And poor old social science and humanities, we just didn't have any of it. But actually, as you dug down, as you found there was a lot of STEM researchers who, because they were actually in this knowledge-based social value, return on it rather than high growth, couldn't access it as well. So when we ran the Healthy Aging Accelerator, not quite in the services, with a non-disciplinary focus, but a solutions, the amount of cross-disciplinary we got in was really quite inspiring. So I think one of the challenges we have to ourselves is how we start looking for solutions that aren't necessarily solely disciplinary based, because I think bringing us together is really important. And my final part of the challenge that we have that we're developing is networks. Aspect is a fantastic network, KE UK is a network, but also Innovate UK have their, what used to be the KTN, Business Connect, and they have a lot of thematic for businesses, but they're really trying to bring the academia in and not the normal academia. So bringing in, that's a chance for arts, humanities, social sciences to really understand the value proposition and the value out of what they have, and then those networks back in the university. So just, again, a bit of an ecosystem thinking.
Yeah, and I found it really interesting when you said you didn't know, you thought STEM had it easy, because, and I think that's bringing us to kind of looking to the future a little bit. So yesterday I was at a financial services industry conference, and very soon the discussion became an AI bingo. But then obviously there is the social science aspect of ethics, it's not just technology innovation. So I guess my question looking forward a little bit is, UK obviously has a great ambition to be a science superpower, but our traditional advantage is also in services intelligence to compete globally. So can I just ask each of you to share a little bit in terms of how do you think that's evolving? Where do you see where we can be more competitive, more global? How do we find the right kind of opportunities? Maybe once again, I start with you.
Great. So I do think that, so I'm going to start with the end of your question about being global. I think, again, one of the things that, linking to Mel's point about thinking about sustainability from the start, I think when you're doing or services, and we were thinking about the services economy, it's all about thinking, again, in a global perspective, like trying to think, okay, yes, it is about being in the UK market, providing solutions to the UK market, and how is your idea going to survive here. But at the same time, I think if you don't think about your global market from the start, again, it is very unlikely that it will be sustainable in the future because of, again, how services develop and how much easier to some extent it is to trade services and to approach clients and to, and it could be as easy as having now a virtual conversation with them and pitching your idea and not even like leaving London. So think about the global perspective, I think, is one thing that we don't focus on enough. Like we know on the trade side that very few businesses even export both goods and services compared to what they could be doing. So I think support for businesses to know what are the opportunities out there is sort of the first thing. So not even in a specific theme, but across the board, and especially SMEs, because they bring so much value to the UK economy and in services as well. And that's experience from our research as well, but also our interaction with others. And then the other point is that we're so strong in areas such as digital trade, and again, like my favorite word, but yeah, digital trade, cross-border data flows, the regulatory environment around the digital aspects, but we're not that great in supporting ventures in those areas or in pushing them forward and seeing how they can work alongside sort of larger companies and can provide an offering out there. So that's definitely, I think, an area which is underexplored. And another point that we can see, so our focus has been a lot on talking about our work in supporting governments and the policy world, but actually a lot of the impact is through working with other businesses and through working with private companies. And I think that there is a lot of space for ventures to help businesses understand better their supply chain in all of the industrial strategy sectors. That's directly linked to kickstarting growth. So thinking about like who are our suppliers now, who are they in the future, and what is their impact with regards to social, environmental, human rights aspect, because we've also moved away from thinking that businesses should be just about generating profitability. We now know that they should be doing a lot more for all of these other sustainability aspects. And there is a lot of space, and LSE has some very interesting initiatives in the area, and I know about other universities as well, that are trying to support businesses in being better at doing business like abroad and being better at their work in many aspects, like exactly mapping better who are they working with, their producers, their customers, where do their products go, how are they used, like all of these things I think are a really good space for commercialization and for working with businesses. And then of course the AI topic. So yeah, I haven't been in a conversation recently where we haven't spoken about all of the benefits of AI in many different areas. So as we are shifting towards sort of more kind of traditional consulting services to more product-based commercialization, in our case in particular, AI is an excellent tool. But again, I think from the start, it is again about thinking about the market validation. So where do we sit within all of those different sort of tools that are trying to build human AI and close to human intelligence, and how does that link to what we already know is our sort of core IP around this very customized, very specialized, very sort of contextualized knowledge that we have within our trade policy hub and within ventures similar to ours. So I think sometimes sort of matching that kind of customization and level of specialization with AI is still not there for us. I still have to figure out how exactly to integrate it in the best possible way so that we don't lose our core in shifting towards using more AI.
Yeah, I just had some. I agree with everything. Thank you. I agree with everything you said. I think there's a structural bind for the short term, and that's the industrial strategy, however we think about it, with regard to the identification of the I8 sectors, and then how those I8 sectors are going to shape or improve or both productivity and growth, not only in a UK context, but Britain in a global economy. So I think structurally, and this will probably filter down most definitely through the usual funding mechanisms that go to universities and other entities around this particular document and what it means for government and future government policy in the short to medium term. That's my first point. I think from an academic perspective, in terms of championing global competitiveness, I think it comes back to Melanie's point about interdisciplinarity and the fact that in order to address the global challenges around climate change, sustainability, an aging population, etc., AI and so on, it's about the disciplines working together, and it's about the value added of disciplines and the synergies between disciplines and interdisciplinary work. And of course, you know, the gauntlet was thrown down earlier about people in universities talking to each other. And I can say at the University of Bristol, I would say this obviously, you know, we do talk to each other across the STEM disciplines. So in terms of competitiveness, the interdisciplinary is a really important framing. In terms of thinking about economic growth, thinking about how we enable and move forward in terms of competitiveness and commercialization, I hope we don't get caught in the cluster trap, where clusters are significantly important drivers for economic growth, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we have clusters and connectivity together. So a place like the City of London isn't a global financial centre because of the assets in the city. What's more important is what flows through London from New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and so on and so forth. So that's a really important message about clusters and the sustainability of clusters. And we've also got to be careful about inequalities that develop between the haves and the have-nots, regarding the strength of places and so on and so forth. I think the AI subject is incredibly interesting, and I'm sure 100 or more years ago, people in this room were talking about, oh, we're moving from canals to railways. I don't know what that technological, you know, innovation is going to bring. Or we're moving from propellers on aeroplanes to you know, the wide-bodied jumbo jet. We obviously have periods of innovation. You know, those economists out there will know about Schumpeter, you know, in innovation waves. But I think AI at the moment is you know, it's still moving through its translation process within organizations, individuals and society. But, you know, we've got to step back and think it's an enabler. And actually, at some point, we'll reach peak AI and something will replace AI. So, you know, we're in this continuous sort of wave of innovation, economic change, growth, productivity, fingers crossed. But AI, I think, is clearly, at this moment in time, and probably for the next decade, is going to drive significant change in all sectors of the economy, in all ways of life. But, you know, there are always downsides, digital divides, digital inequalities. So, you know, I think this is where we've got to be really, as social scientists, we've got to be really clear that we've got to try to work to bring everyone with us. But when we step back, you know, at this moment in time, the framing is around economic growth, productivity, and it's how we can support organizations, academics or other entities to commercialize within those I8 sectors and maybe on the edges of the I8 sectors where they connect together, you know, the connectivity between creative, financial, and professional services, those three together could be a real boom, big bang for commercialization and economic growth. So we've got to be careful not to just get caught in a silo where actually it's what's in between these spaces that's going to drive innovation and growth and make that step change.
Mel, I'm going to throw a difficult question at you again. So,
Well prepared for that one.
then how would, if you have to change one thing about funding to unlock, you know, the kind of the prospect which John and Elitsa talked about earlier on, what would you do about incentivizing this greater sort of, you know, kind of ecosystem view, the greater multidisciplinary view?
Oh, that's a tough one. Because if there was just one thing to change, I think we would have done it. And I think that that's really the challenge, isn't it? Is that it's a complex ecosystem that we're in. And I always have said impact starts with the funder, right? If the funder isn't designing the call right, getting the right peer reviewers, and also giving the seed funding and enabling those communities. But it doesn't end with the funder. The funder is just the part of that story. I think where UKRI is going, particularly, I think is quite helpful in a sense, again, from mission or challenge driven. Because again, you're taking out the discipline. And I think that's a fundamental shift that we really need to think about when we move forward. It's about what's my value add as my discipline along with others, and what other disciplinary perspectives do we need. So I think that that's really helpful. And I think when I was working across many funders, there was a lot of thinking, even globally, that way. And I think one thing that we have in a global context, particularly back to your question, when you come out of the UK, and it's very humbling, is how strong the UK brand is for getting this right, or at least not making as many mistakes. But we're a desired partner. And I think that that's really fascinating. And I guess the question, kind of back to what you said, is a lot of universities or independent research organizations have campuses and have connections overseas already. And how much are we making the most of that insights and the intel that we're getting from that? I think that's a really fascinating one. And then, of course, I have to speak as a director of the GW4. Apologies, I'm now new in the role, but I feel like I need to do that plug. Is that the question that we might need to move on, and maybe that's where funders can help, is moving us outside of our universities, because commercialization is seen as IP and profit in the university and very, something, going outside of that. But actually working in partnership, as if we're having complex, multi-sector, multi-university partnerships, how do we reframe commercialization and spin out in that complexity, that it isn't just a single university then that gets the benefit of that? I think that's a complexity that, working with across partnerships that are there is really important. And I think the final kind of thought about funders, so as I say, you asked for one and you're now getting a whole brainstorm of them. But the one we haven't really touched on here yet is investors. Who are those investors coming in and wanting to support this? And when I was working on the Newton Fund, it was very humbling how middle-income countries are very driven. The investors are driven by social value return. They want the money return, but the needs in the country are so great that they also want to invest to improve the country. And I think, again, there's a connection there with the types of investment we've been speaking about. There's a lot of philanthropic, but there's actually non-philanthropic, of people who just want their money to make a difference. And I think, again, as a one sort of area that working together as a system that we could be thinking about is how do we capitalize on that? When you go out and speak to, particularly in the financial services, I was finding a lot of kind of young people younger people who were in the city that were really wanting to do that, but they had nowhere to go to land that. So I think that's a really potentially next step for this as well.
And just to follow up on that, maybe a question for everyone on that sort of return on investment or giving something back to the investor. What is it that we can do more to essentially deliver more value, create more value for our investors? I don't just mean economic value.
Well, just my experience on this is really understanding what's driving that investor, right? And I think that's been really humbling working with Innovate UK, because they have a support program of working with investors to kind of help de-risk new areas. And what was really interesting was the different types of investors, but really understanding their motivations. So it's about pivoting what we're doing to think about, well, how do we evidence what they want? And different investors are driven by a different need for what they want in addition. Of course they want, they would like at least their money back, but they're investing for a reason. It's there, and I think it's understanding that purpose. So I think one of the real challenges that we have is not thinking on a traditional pipeline that we've all been kind of trained to think about, which was already talked about in the opening panel, of just the economic and patents. But actually, there's a lot of other investors have a lot of other reasons for that, and understanding the different types. Now that presents a challenge, right? Because if you're a tech transfer person and you've got 17 investors and they all want something different, it's how do you bring that in internal and start collecting things across the norm. And I know that one of the, was it in Oxford? I'm going to get the brand wrong. I do apologize. But Mari, she was looking at actually how do you use the what are they called? The global development, the SDGs, yeah. She really created a different approach of looking at how do you capture the evidence of the value of the commercialization against the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's a really, that's a very innovative way of thinking about that, along with other elements of it. And I think we need to start thinking a bit more collectively about how do we bring that together. That was a very long answer to your question.
I'll just say that this is one of our homework questions for the ARC Accelerator that we've just joined. So hopefully in a few months' time I'll be able to give you an answer that holds water. But with Future Finance and the UK RI Innovate UK ESRC project, actually a lot of organisations, their investment has been time, and what we've been giving back is actually contributing towards their social purpose if they're a credit union or a building society. So thinking about a different way of capturing a KPI from their perspective, which isn't monetized, it's actually one which relates to their mission, their purpose, their values. And that's actually been really challenging for us, but at the same time really rewarding in that we're giving something back. And actually, this is something that we are thinking about how we can sort of incorporate some of this into our ARC pitch when we get to March time next year with the ARC Accelerator. So I'll move on rapidly.
Just super quick, since I think both of you covered this thoroughly, but I think on the side of kind of we're still a small business, so I think that for example, requirements on behalf of sort of government institutions that in addition to what we're delivering under sort of a specific service contract, we also have to deliver social value. That sometimes creates a lot of pressure for the project. So it might be a 6-month project, a 50K project, which of course, and it's not massive, but then we have to show that this has helped employability in a specific sector, that we have developed skills, that we have trained people, that there are hours and hours of training and sessions, that we've included diversity and I don't want to go on a rant, but these are all things that, of course, as being based in the London School of Economics, they're at the heart of what we do. We have a lot of principles, but then translating them into the actual sort of day-to-day things that the government wants to see on social value, for example, is quite tough. So promising to, in addition to delivering a project, which will return, they'll get back their investment in the form of the research and all of the added value that they're going to get. But we also have to deliver a lot of extra social value. And I understand why this is being done, but I think that we're just very quickly moving into a space where we just have to do a lot with very little. And if you're on the smaller business scale, that's quite tough. And we have the privilege of having the backing of the LSE brand, their policies and everything that we do. But if we spin out eventually, or if we're thinking about a venture like outside of the university, we would have to create all of these things internally and have to be able to do all of this on our own, which is really tough. So imagine that I'll have to, in addition to everything else, separate out sort of training hours for staff on, in addition to everything else. So I think that it's just a little bit a little bit of extra. These are all things that we want to do and we want to get there, but maybe we're just trying to get there super fast while we're still trying to do a lot of other things in increasing productivity. And then in the end of the day, that's what government wants us to do. So, yeah.
I did promise the audience about 10, 15 minutes for questions. So I don't know if anyone have, we have a roving mic. Yes, there we go. So you don't need to shout. That's great. Please tell us, where you're from and your question.
Sure. Is this on? So hi, I'm Helena. I'm the Innovation and Partnership Manager at Oxford University for the Social Sciences. My questions for the panel, but also slightly for our chair as well, is thinking about the strength of the existing services market across the UK. For ventures coming out of universities, what's the kind of perception or position of that challenge to existing providers, so the Accentures? And if we have new ventures coming out trying to offer those insights and services to government and to business, but they're going to be coming at it as an SME, what kind of market are they competing in from your perspective? So mindful that a lot of academics or students will go into professional services rather than staying in academia. So I guess there's a kind of question about competitiveness within the existing market because the UK is so strong. Question a little bit about how do we encourage people who've made the choice to stay in academia to go and compete with a market that they didn't go into initially. And then perhaps a little bit about what existing professional services could do to support UK universities as the government is turning and seeing them as a source of innovation. Big question. Pick which bit you like.
Wow, and I was hoping just to chair the panel. I think in terms of the question, so I'll say, if I'm thinking where's the biggest competitive challenge, I would still see the relationship between traditional consulting like us and the academic world as very much complementary and enriching. In fact, if anything, I would say the symbiotic relationship is becoming stronger now that we're facing external forces, you may say disrupting the traditional consulting industry. One may say, a whole lot of desk research I could have done with AI, why would you need to pay, why do I pay a junior consultant to do that? So that is a time when we actually need to do more with the speciality of universities, with the genuine spark of idea, the genuine IP to kind of feed into our kind of competitive edge, as it were. I think I'll probably say that's more of a complementary relationship. And in terms of what can we do to sort of encourage sort of students, once again, I wouldn't say it as like fork in the road as in academia or joining like a big evil, consulting firm. It's actually, I'm seeing increasingly these two becoming kind of combined into one path. So for example, at Accenture, I noticed in the past 2 years or so, we're working a lot more with universities to launch kind of training programs and even masters. Well, I think we now have a master's in generative AI with Stanford. I mean, not in the UK, but essentially the aim is to show that we know the market demand a certain type of training that cannot be done by purely professional training. It requires, research rigor, social science or science, and then we're actually collaborating with university, launching such programs. I'm seeing that a lot more. So I'm actually, instead of saying, graduates, joining this or that, is actually more of a, a slightly more sort of blurred journey. That's what I'm seeing a little bit more. Yeah.
Maybe I can just add with very practical experience, because we treat larger consultancies both as competitors but also as partners, and it really varies even from sort of service contract to service contract and project to project, and in many cases we do have to compete with them in a space which is getting tighter and tighter. On one hand, because some of the, of course, development agencies that used to bring in also funding into the space of social science projects, now that funding has been reduced. So we have large development consultancies that usually didn't occupy as much of the space in the UK, but we're looking elsewhere, are back in the UK and looking for the UK consulting market, for example, to try to get sort of their profits up. So we are a little bit kind of facing this kind of trio of original consultancies, but also development, sort of large development consultancies, plus us as smaller players. And Kuangyi was completely right. On some occasions, partnerships work very well. We come in as sort of a specialist supplier of trade policy analysis. We come to do a very thorough evidence review. We could do quality assurance. We can do case studies. We do some of the, for example, interviews and so there is a lot that sort of we can do to complement what they do. But sometimes we get sort of a little bit more co-opted as kind of a brand or as a kind of, oh, we have the academic hat, but actually we have very little participation afterwards. And we have to like constantly strive to make sure that we hold our ground and we are there to actually contribute to something, and we're not just there to share our name and to kind of give the research academic stamp. And that happens a lot. To be sought after. And then I would say worst case scenario is when sort of consultancies, smaller spin-outs get bought out by the larger consultancies, and that happens. So that might be actually your end game. So that might not be a bad thing for some people. But if you're like me and you feel like your venture is your baby, you might not want to get it to kind of, to sell it to one of the larger consultancies. So it's a very kind of complex, again, relationship. It's not as straightforward, but I think that it really is on an ad hoc basis. So this is the project, this is what we need, this is how we can collaborate with more traditional consultancies versus this is where we can stand our ground and really showcase expertise.
If I may, I might just chime in on that. Because I started. I'm like an Accenture boomerang. I started at Accenture as many graduates do, and I started a small boutique consulting firm with a few others before that company getting acquired by Accenture 6 years ago. So I kind of very much know that kind of journey as well. So I think the feeling is, yes, the dilution of a certain culture that you are very proud of is your baby is one thing. But the platform is also enormous in terms of, you can think of a spark of idea and there's always sort of funding and resources to help make it happen. I think that's really attractive. And in terms of, I think I didn't quite touch on the sort of the proposition of what we're actually offering alongside, sort of more specialized research-focused ones. A lot of people, large clients, do go for the like of Big Four or us. There's a saying, you never get sacked by hiring a Big Four. It's because you are safe, and then it's because you have a lot of institutional knowledge about your clients. You know the people, you know how the system works, over the past 30 years, and also you have the vantage point whereby you know all the company's competitors do. So a lot of times, the traditional consulting firm offer that kind of been there, done that, I know what your peers are doing kind of perspective, which I think it's great, but could be sharpened at the edge with more innovative ideas, from research focused.
I think I've got 2 points to make. I think the first point is it's on record the success of the University of Bristol in terms of commercialisation in spin-out, set squared. So that's a formal mechanism for commercialisation. But I think what is really, really interesting is the informal channels of commercialisation through our students, and thinking about what our students are doing from years 1 undergraduate to 3, 4, and also the taught MSc and PhD students, and the intellectual spark and that entrepreneurial spirit of actually thinking about, I'm going to study for a degree, but actually I'm going to start a company as well. And I think this is for universities, I think this is a real opportunity, but at the same time a real challenge in terms of capturing that and formalising that. Because, again, I can only speak about the University of Bristol, but, we have, there's a fintech society with probably now over 500 members. And all of these members want, they're from law, they're from economics, they're from computer sciences, they're from across the remit of disciplines. They want to... some of them are already, in that space, working on algorithms, working on X, Y, Z. So I think this is where the challenge lies, and I think this is where the opportunities lie going forward in the future. In terms, just think of the constituency of students of all the different universities that are actually thinking carefully about commercialising their ideas. They want to be a startup, etc., while they're still studying for their degree in anatomy or dentistry or business and management studies or English literature and so on. So I think that's a key. I think that's the key point I would make.
I was just reflecting on your question specifically, and I think just as I guess a different perspective is everybody right to run a commercial venture, right? That's I mean, what are the other pathways when we're talking about the mindset and the skill set behind it? So and I guess I sometimes worry that people say that the end goal is to commercialize, because the commercialization is a pathway. What's the end goal that you're actually trying to achieve? And is a commercial the best way to do it? I think it's having that honest discussion. But then with your point about the crowded market, you are absolutely right, but there's other markets opening up. And what was really fascinating working in the legal and insurance is how much that they're needing to go into other areas that they've never been in before, especially with the data and especially with the online world we have. There's different markets opening. So while there's a crowded market, it always comes back to, as you're on the journey, John, is what's our unique selling point, right? What are we bringing that somebody else can't? But I think it's about, and you are in this probably a lot more than me, but it's having that honest conversation with people. You know, I want to create this, and then you have to kind of roll it back and say, well, why do you want to create it? What is it that you want to do, et cetera? And I think opening the mindset beyond that is also just helpful.
I want to be respectful of time. I think we're largely sort of at time, but I'm sure, you know, we'll head around and you can sort of drop us emails or add us on LinkedIn for any kind of further discussions or questions. And I think with that, I think if I take one learning from today is, I came in chairing this panel and thinking maybe, you know, there's less on the sort of Venn diagram in terms of the overlap between what we do, and now I feel like, you know, the overlapping areas is really quite large after the panel, and I felt like I've learned so much from our panelists. So please join me in thanking our amazing panelists for the great conversation.